Hello. Adam, they gave us like a pitcher of water but no cups, so I think we just sort of like, and you have some.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, me too, me too. This is my friend Adam Mansbach, right here, everybody. There will be no hard-hitting questions tonight, just embarrassing ones. Because we hang out together, our families associate with each other. I met you right when I moved back to me and my wife, Melissa, and my oldest daughter, Sammy, moved back to the Bay during our time when we were in Berkeley. We escaped. But, oh, there you go. I wasn't trying to water shame you.
That was also entirely our fault because the cups were backstage.
Yeah, no, we just were, yeah. So first of all, it's book launch day today, right?
Yes, the book came out today. Thank you.
How many books is this now for you? Do you know? It's a lot.
I don't really count anymore. It's a lot of books. It's a lot of books.
I have two. One I co-wrote.
I mean, a lot of my books are very short. Go the Fuck to Sleep is like 400 words, many of them repeated more than once.
One in particular. You just dropped the F-bomb in the church right off the bat, huh?
Well, I had two things on my bucket list. One was launch the Golem of Brooklyn in a church, obviously. Made perfect sense to me.
Not a synagogue.
No, of course not. Why would you do that? A Presbyterian church specifically.
Yes.
And then the other was like curse in the church.
Okay.
Repeatedly.
Mission accomplished. So when you sent me the galleys for this book, I was like, your last book came out, 2021, about your brother. And I was like, didn't his book just come out? What is the process, because these are very different books, what is the process for this book? Was this something you've been working on for a while, or did it happen after your last book came out?
This was not a book that I was working on for very long. I wrote this book last spring and part of the summer. I wrote it in like 3.5, 4 months. I probably spent not an equal amount of time, but a good amount of time sort of like pre-writing and planning and outlining and that kind of thing. I like at this point to be very prepared when I go in to write a book. I've learned that the hard way, that like just diving in with like a vague idea ends up costing me more time in the long run. So I think I'd been toying for a little while with the idea of a golem. I had sort of the vague comic notion that it would be funny. You know, in Jewish folklore, the golem is a creature of Jewish folklore dating from like the 1500s roughly. And a golem is always created by a very learned and holy man, a rabbi, a prophet even, and always at a time of immediate crisis for the Jewish people, which is like, you know, more or less any time in the history of the Jewish people. So it had struck me that it would be funny to have a golem that was made by just a regular secular schmuck who didn't really have much Jewish knowledge, who learned the proper incantations and prayers by reading them on the internet. And hand in hand with that was the idea that this guy would not be bringing the golem into existence for any particular reason or any immediate crisis, that he would just sort of be like stoned and messing around. So I was sort of, and then of course that the golem would come to life and not speak English but only Yiddish and be like screaming at him in a language he didn't speak and trashing his apartment. I had all of that for a while, but that was not a novel, that was like a skit, you know? And the novel came together for me when I sort of crossbred that idea with another one that I'd been tumbling around in my mind for some months. I'd been trying to figure out how to write a kind of speculative future sci-fi novel about epigenetics. The notion that trauma is something that can be passed down generationally in the DNA. And I couldn't quite wrap my mind around the novel I wanted to write about that subject. I had this whole very elaborate framework, but I only had the framework, not like the plot. I had this idea that like scientists would figure out not just that epigenetic trauma was passed down, but they'd be able to specifically pinpoint the moment it entered the DNA, and that this would lead to kind of a new version of a reparations movement. That once you determine that, the trauma enters, you're of African descent and it enters during the transatlantic slave trade, or you're Jewish and it enters the year there was a pogrom in the city that your forefathers lived in, then there becomes the possibility of like a legal claim. And, the next step I took from there in this novel was that people would learn how to transplant these epigenetic markers of trauma and sort of buy and sell and trade them, and that certain people would try to acquire them, other people would try to obscure them. It was very involved, and that these transplants would result in people suddenly being able to access the specific memories that caused the trauma, but not the people who experienced it, only the people who had bought and had the trauma implanted. So anyway, I couldn't really figure out how to write that novel, but what that led me to was the idea of a golem who, unlike any previous golem anybody had ever written, was not kind of an empty vessel, but a very full vessel, because this golem had an ancestral memory. That there wasn't a golem, but there was the golem, who has not just been made, but remade. And it's only one golem throughout all of history. So he's a walking repository of Jewish history and trauma. Those two words, of course, are practically synonymous. And that this would be the golem that this hapless schmuck would bring to life in his Brooklyn apartment. And then I was like, that's a book.
Just to be clear, it's pronounced Golem.
Oh, my bad.
Can you go over the pronunciation? I actually listened, as I was telling Adam, I actually listened to the audiobook, which I think is super. I mean, it's great to read books like these, but the audiobook, which was read by a friend of yours?
Yeah, the audiobook was read by my friend and frequent collaborator, Danny Hock, one of the finest actors of our generation.
Yeah.
And also, like, literally the only person who could read this audiobook, because the golem speaks a ton of Yiddish in this book, and he also, when he speaks English, speaks in a kind of like strong Eastern European accent. And there's also, Danny's the guy for this book. Danny speaks like 27 languages. What were you asking me?
Well, that's how I learned that it's Golem and not Lord of the Rings Gollum.
Right, Golem with a long O, not Gollum from the Lord of the Rings. I'm also aware that there are golems in Minecraft. I don't care.
So the whole story about epigenetics that you just told about this novel is actually a part of the beginning of the book, where this guy sort of explains that the main character explains that he was writing this story. And as he just told it goes on for a while, so much so I started to forget that I was in a different book. Like I was like, oh wait, we got to get to this Golem book, because it's really involved. And I was like, oh, this is a thing Adam tried to make and it didn't work out, so he just snuck it into this book.
Yeah, much of the first chapter of this book is involved with the summarizing of the novel that both I and my protagonist Len were unable to write. I wanted to get those elements, those thematic elements into the book, but also beyond that, I wanted to set a certain kind of contract with the reader. I believe that in any work, you very quickly set kind of the terms of your contract with your reader, your viewer, your listener. Within the first few pages or minutes, it's kind of incumbent on you to let them know what it is they're in for. And by beginning this book with a story within the story, a summary of a novel that isn't this novel, I wanted to let the reader know that that's the type of shit they're in for. That this book is going to tell stories within stories. It's going to depart from the main spine of the book to digress, to go backward in time, to tell stories of the golem throughout history, to tell side adventures. The Talmud does it, so why shouldn't I?
Some people in here really got that.
Yeah, there's somebody in here who's reading the Talmud.
Well,
besides me.
Yeah, let's talk about you. Actually, are you still doing that? Talk about that.
Yeah. This is also like another like strange thing to be talking about in a church. But there's a Jewish practice that I was only recently made aware of about 5 months ago called Daf Yomi. And what that is a commitment to study and discuss one page of the Talmud a day. And if you do this, you've read the entire Talmud in a mere 7.5 years. So I'm doing it. I'm doing it with my friend Natalia Petrozella. She's a professor at the New School. And it's fascinating. I find it deeply, deeply interesting. I look forward to it every day. A page of the Talmud, incidentally, is the equivalent of probably like 15 to 20 like pages in a book. These are large pages. And I find it fascinating. It's not making me more observant in any way, but it's a fascinating way to get insight into the society, the mind state, the way that these rabbis, I'd always sort of use the Talmud as an illustration of what I thought about Judaism, which is basically that it's just one big argument, because the Talmud literally is written over the course of hundreds of years. There are thousands of rabbis debating every point of Jewish law and custom. But when you actually really dig into it, actually read it on a daily basis, you find all kinds of fascinating and bizarre things. And you learn a lot about the society they're writing about. You find yourself sometimes horrified, sometimes absolutely enraptured. There are stories that come out of nowhere. They'll be talking about like whether or not you can hire an agent to deliver a divorce proceeding to your wife, and if so, whether that agent is allowed to subcontract to a sub-agent, and you're like, this is boring. And then out of nowhere, suddenly it's a story about like demons in pits who can impersonate human beings. And you're also like, if demons can impersonate human beings, shouldn't that ramify more broadly through this text? Like, doesn't that kind of like throw everything in doubt? Why is this only mentioned on this one page and then like forgotten about for the next 70 pages? Yeah, it's interesting. It's deeply, deeply nerdy. But I'm really enjoying it.
But also it's deeply, deeply Jewish, and you are a self-identified secular Jew.
I would call myself a secular Jew, but I'm very interested in the pursuit of Jewish knowledge.
Well, that's what's interesting about the book. The main character in some way is maybe sort of a stand-in for you, but is a guy who is like owns his secular Jewishness and owns the fact that means there's things he doesn't have to think about, like being observant, but also really is so like I'm going to kick all that stuff away, but I'm also defensive of my Jewishness and can be engaged in the fight against anti-Semitism, but also like have this dance, and then there's characters around him who are like who are more observant or are going through a different version of Judaism, and there's sort of this ongoing argument through the book of like even the Golem's like I think he says I'm a non-religious Jew, and he's like that's not a thing, something to that effect.
Very early on in the book, so the main character Len, after he makes the golem, and by the way you make a golem is by taking mud or clay, reciting secret incantations and prayers, which often involve the ineffable secret name of God, and always involve inscribing the Hebrew word for truth on the forehead of the golem or writing it on a piece of paper that's inserted into the golem's mouth. This is how you animate the golem and turn it from clay or mud into a living is the wrong word, but an animate creature. I forgot what I was going to say because I was busy describing the golem. Oh, after Len does this and brings the golem to life and realizes he can't speak to the golem, the first thing he does is run out to find a translator, someone who can speak Yiddish, and he goes to a nearby bodega because there's a woman there who he once heard speak Yiddish. He heard this woman curse out some young Hasidic kids who came in to buy cigarettes. So he's like, aha, she speaks Yiddish. And this woman, Miri, is the other main character of the book. She is a woman who grew up in a nearby Hasidic enclave in Williamsburg, is a lesbian, so left as soon as she possibly could because that is not really accepted in that community, and has been working and on her own in this Yemeni bodega ever since. And one of the earliest pieces of conversation between them, I think is what you're referring to. Len has convinced her to come back to his apartment to meet and translate for this golem, which was no easy task. And she asks him a number of questions like, you could have like taken a video of this golem to show me, to convince me that you really made a golem. He's like, yeah, didn't think of that. She's like, did you try speaking Hebrew to it? He's like, I don't speak Hebrew. And Miri has almost this panic attack and asks him this question that she almost fears to utter, which is like, are you even Jewish? And Len's response is, I'm culturally Jewish. And she's like, I don't know what that means. Like, what does that even mean? That's illegible to her growing up the way she did. And yeah, throughout the course of the book, different versions of Judaism are very much pitted against each other, different philosophies, different conceptions. I think Len is somebody who, while he's very secular, his deepest convictions are a sense of what he believes a Jewish morality is and demands of you. He would probably make a distinction between anti-Semitism as practiced by non-Jews and what he might describe as like an anti-Jewishness, which would be Jews acting in ways that he feels is anathema to what it means to be Jewish. Jews acting in ways that are just not simpatico possible under the realm of the moral scope and compass of Judaism, if that makes sense.
Tikkun olam.
Yeah, the notion of tikkun olam comes up a lot. It's a term
I was just impressed that I said it because
that was brilliant. Yeah,
thanks.
You want to say it again?
No. I really don't feel good about it. It didn't land as well as I thought it would. So I think somebody thought I said Hakuna Matata, so I'm done. So.
Yeah, both are good.
Yeah.
Tikkun olam is the notion of repairing the world, and this is a very important concept in Judaism, and it's one that Miri and Len ultimately come to kind of like an impasse about, because, you know, ultimately what happens in this book, after a number of adventures, the golem is consistently asking from the moment he appears, where's the crisis? Len can't really answer this. There's nobody at this particular moment killing the Jews. The golem, it also bears saying, has not appeared on the earth since 1941. The last time he was made and unmade was in the Ukraine in 1941. He was destroyed by machine gun bullets by German soldiers and thrown into the Babin Yar Gorge along with 33,000 other Jews who were murdered in a 36-hour period in what is known as the Holocaust of bullets, the early stages of the war and of the Holocaust. He sort of passed out of time and memory at that point. So he actually emerges in this iteration unaware that the Holocaust even happened, which means Miri and Len have to explain it to him. But ultimately, they make their way to a white nationalist rally in Kentucky. Miri's eventual answer to where is the crisis is to show the golem a video of the Charlottesville Unite the Right tiki torch Nazis, and is like, this is who's trying to kill the Jews. And the golem is like, now we're getting somewhere. Where are those guys? And it turns out that there's a rally in a couple of days' time in Kentucky called the Save Our History's Future Rally. And these same kind of folks are going to be gathering, and the golem is like, let's go. And eventually the question of what he intends to do is raised. Like, they get to West Virginia and finally kind of work up the courage to be like, what's the plan here? You're just going to scare them, right? And the golem is like, the golem going to kill everybody. And Len and Miri are like, oh, that's not good for the Jews. And ultimately, this sort of leads to a conversation about tikkun olam. Like, we can't let him do that, Miri. We have to repair the world. And Miri is like, has it ever occurred to you that this is how we repair the world?
So, yeah, and then the cops came. So a lot of this book, this is a question I want to ask you. As I'm not even a secular Jew. I'm not a Jew in any way.
You're Jew adjacent.
I am Jew adjacent, thank you. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I did grow up with some secular Jews, so I'm familiar with this idea of like, I am Jewish, but I am not observant in the way that the religion tells me to be. So you're going to hang out with one of my secular Jewish friends in Chicago. So there's a as I'm reading this book, as someone who's Jewish adjacent, but I'm like, I would imagine there's lots of this book that is sailing over my head. Like, what is the percentage of for us non-Jewish people that you think we're like probably missing from this book? Because there's a lot of like specific references. There's a lot of jokes where I'm like, did I really get that joke, or am I just laughing because I don't want to feel left out? There's a lot of like Yiddish. There's a lot of and it felt like it was really written in a great way for the insiders. And as an outsider, you get to come along with us, but you're not going to get all this. You know what I'm saying? Like, I enjoyed the whole thing, but I was very aware at the end, like, I probably missed some portion of this book.
Yeah, you probably did. It's funny. I feel like in one way or another, I've been answering versions of this question for the last 20 years.
So let's move on.
Well, no, like, when I used to write novels that were like hip-hop novels, it was like, well, what if people don't understand your frame of reference? What if people don't know what you're quoting and riffing on? And it's like, well, every novel, every work of literature has a frame of reference, has works that it is in dialogue with. And when you read The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, you probably won't know all those reference points either. And it's your choice or Shakespeare, or anything. You can stop and you can look each and every one of them up. You can let it wash over you, or you can do something that falls somewhere in between. I did, in some sense, write this book to be best understood by a Jewish audience, but also there's no such thing as a monolithic Jewish audience. Like, there are multiple Jewish audiences, some of which will hate this book. I'm already hearing from them. For others, it's like the book they've been looking for. Luckily, I'm hearing from a few of them too. So it's hard for me to know exactly what somebody like yourself is missing. I just don't know, but I think that's okay. There's also a lot of stuff in this book that may appear to be history, but is actually stuff that I just invented out of whole cloth. So there's also
I went on
that.
some rabbit hole Googles. I'm like, this isn't a thing.
Like what?
Larry David's manager. I think that was the first one.
Yeah, right. Larry David plays a certain role in in this book. The Golem learns English by watching a ton of Curb Your Enthusiasm after accidentally ingesting a tremendous amount of LSD, and then
like you do.
Yeah, and in so doing, sort of sits there and remembers his entire history. And this Golem, his memory and his history go back to the dawn of creation. He's not a creation of the 15th century. He has memories of ancient Egypt. He has memories of murdering Mattathias, because he was too zealous. And when he was brought to life by Mattathias, who is, the father of the Maccabee rebellion, was started by Mattathias, who, when asked to worship an idol, refused, and then the next Jew over worshiped that idol. So Mattathias killed him, because it says right in the Torah that you're not allowed to worship idols, shortly before it says you're not allowed to kill people, and then fled into the hills and began this 3-year war against the Greek-Syrian army that was completed by his son Judah Maccabee. This is, the Hanukkah story. And if you ever wondered why the Hanukkah story is mostly about the miracle of the oil, like why we mostly ignore this 3-year gnarly guerrilla war in favor of the fact that the 164 CE equivalent of a light bulb outlived its warranty, the reason is that Judah Maccabee then founded the Hasmonean dynasty, which proceeded to oppress the Jews and play grab-ass with the Roman Empire for the next 100 years. And by the time it was time to put this holiday down in the Mishnah, nobody wanted to give them any type of props whatsoever. So I have a story in the book about the Golem coming to life, being brought to life by Mattathias, and he quickly decides that the greatest threat to the Jews is Mattathias' bloodthirsty, zealous ass, so he kills him. That never really happened, There's a lot of research that I did, but in service of wholly made up historical chapters about the Golem that I want to feel as if they are ripped from mythology, as if they've existed for a long time. The chapter in Cordoba in the 11th century when the stable hand makes the golem is a good example. So like I researched the Interfaith Academy in Cordoba and the fact that there were many, many Jews there who served as translators. This was the golden age of Spanish Jewry, which might be better called the slightly less crappy age of Spanish Jewry. But I have a story about a stable hand who overhears a bunch of rabbis talking about the makings of golems, and he has this epiphany, and he builds a golem with the intention, and the golem comes to life and is like, what's up? Who do I have to kill? He's like, no. You're not here to be a brute. You're here to be a scholar. And the golem's like, nah. And the guy is like, here are all the holy books of our religion. What I want you to do is read them all. What the scholars and the rabbis and the sages have not realized is that they can never know the true holy name of God. It's impossible for them. But you, a creature created out of holy words, a creature created, this is your true purpose. So sit in this cave and read the Talmud and read the Mishnah and read the Torah and read all of these other mystical books until you figure out the true name of God so that I can summon my creator with it. And the golem is like, you're bugging. But he spends the next 18 years reading, and he finds nothing, and eventually gets so frustrated with this that he pretends to have frozen. He pretends to have been transformed into a statue so that this stable hand will give up hope and erase the olive from his forehead, rendering him clay again. So I just made all that stuff up. I thought it was cool. But there really was an academy in Cordoba.
Very Hassan Minaj of you. There's a part of the book that I like. I love the book, but there's a part of the book that I really sort of felt like, I've heard this discussion before in some ways. There's the idea of Jewish people, white supremacy will wipe out the truth and promote a fiction that becomes a stereotype that bears no relevant relationship to the truth. My friend Hari Kondabolu has a funny joke about the racism doesn't make sense. It says Mexicans are lazy, also Mexicans take all the jobs. That being the idea, white supremacy says both these things are true. Yeah. And so there's a section in the book about not Jewish people. There's a stereotype of Jewish people not being able to stand up to conflict. And there's a character in the book who's like, we have always stood up to conflict. Would you like to read from this section of the book?
Yeah, let me find it. Okay. This is a part of the book where Len and Miri and the golem are fleeing from the death of a congressman who a bunch of Hasids tried to get the golem to strong arm, but he had a heart attack before the golem could. So they flee to rural Maryland, where Len has an uncle who bought a little tiny piece of land in the middle of nowhere, but then that land began to be developed, and suddenly his lakeside secret paradise is full of a bunch of neighbors that he doesn't like. So naturally, he starts dressing up like Bigfoot to terrorize them. And he tells a story, this guy, Uncle Josh, tells a story about his grandfather. This is what you're talking about, right? And the Yiddish black hand. Let me see if I can. Yeah, okay. This guy's Uncle Josh is extremely drunk. Let me tell you a story, Lenny, said Uncle Josh, about your great-grandfather. He waved a hand loosely at Miri and the golem, his elbow an increasingly wobbly fulcrum. He calls me his uncle, but I'm really his dad's first cousin. He swung his finger around to Len. What do you know about Martin Bronstein? Not that much, said Len, happy to be talking about anything besides the cataclysmic destruction of property. Oh, because Uncle Josh has been trying to convince the golem to smash all his neighbors' houses, just out of spite. He's like, no, they're all anti-Semites. They're like, no, they're not. He pushed a pushcart in the Bronx or something. Your father only saw them a couple of times a year, but me, I grew up a 20-minute subway ride away. We visited every weekend when I was little, and then when my grandmother died, Grandpa Marty came to live with us. We shared a room for a while. One day, my dad came home with a Woody Allen album. We all sat down around the stereo to listen, and after about 10 minutes, Grandpa Marty gets up from his chair, grabs his cane, hobbles over to the turntable, grabs the record, breaks it over his knee, and walks out of the room. That night, when we're both lying there in the dark, I ask him why he did it. And he says, all this namby-pamby, scared of his own shadow, complaining about everything, that's not what a Jew is. Then he turned on the lamp. Come here, sonny boy, he says. Go under the bed and take out my suitcase. So I do. And what's Grandpa Marty want to show me? Uncle Josh paused as if expecting a round of guesses. When none were forthcoming, he poured himself another drink. His pistol. I'm 8, sitting there holding a 60-year-old gun, and it's loaded. Put it back away, sonny, the old man says, and don't ever touch it again. Then he lights up his pipe. I'm sitting there on the floor trying not to piss myself, thinking about what my parents would do if they knew there was a loaded gun in my room. And he says, go ahead, Joshy, ask me. Zadie, why do you have a gun? And he says to me, have you ever heard of Joe Toblinski? No, Zadie. Johnny Levinsky? No, Zadie. Charlie the Cripple? No, Zadie. He puffs on his pipe and says, those 3 ran the Yiddish Black Hand. If you wanted to sell ice cream on the Lower East Side, manufacture seltzer, run a livery stable, you paid them. And if you didn't pay, sonny boy, then I came around with my pistol. Uncle Josh nodded at Len. I said exactly what you said. I said, I thought you had a push cart. And Grandpa Marty said, where do you think I kept the gun?
So for me, certainly as a black person, there's all these stereotypes out there that are just, you're like, I don't even know where this came from, but I have to wrestle with every day. One of my good friends, Bruce Packman, also a secular, I don't know if he's a secular Jew, he's in and out of, he's Jewish. I don't want to describe him.
We resist easy categorization.
Yeah, I don't want to, but, and it's like from one of the ways we became friends was he was like, do you understand that Jewish people used to be boxers, used to be gangsters, as a way to go, it's the thing that we have be associated with now is not who we were. And a way of sort of like, so there's a part of this book to me that is about like reminding Jewish people in the world that we're cool. You know what I mean? Like I'm sort of boiling it down to that it is not this thing that sort of, like you said, the Woody Allen, the Hollywood, the da-da-da-da, the nebbish, we're not, that may be that guy, but that's not all of us.
Yeah, no, that is one iteration. And it's funny, like your friend, that's a type. The Jewish guy who's always reminding people that Jews used to be like wrestlers and organized criminals is a type of Jew.
And taking pride in, we used to be organized criminals.
Yeah. Sadder and more important to me and more fraught to me is the Jewish guy who's always saying like, we used to be part of the civil rights movement. You know, there's that guy too. We're people with a long history and a fraught and fascinating history. And some of you said earlier, you know, really struck a chord with me, this notion that, you know, the stereotypes contradict each other, right? So like, yeah, Mexicans are lazy and they're taking all the jobs. Anti-Semitism, which does not map perfectly onto racism, they're different things, but they're related things, and they're wielded usually by the same people.
They're under the umbrella of white supremacy.
They very much are. Similarly, there's sort of anti-Semitism from above and from below. There's the Jew as this venal, parasitic, filthy creature who invades the body politic and destroys it from within. And there's also the super intelligent, world-controlling Jew who from the shadows puppeteers everything and controls the banks and the world economy and is behind every modern war. It's both at once. And neither one makes any sense, and they don't make any less sense if you try to hold them both together because neither one makes any sense to begin with. But understanding anti-Semitism, which is something these characters often in this book struggle to do, it is important to understand that it's not just hatred of Jews. It's a worldview and a praxis that is the bottom of the funnel. Like all conspiracies, all of this stuff, like ultimately, if you are somebody who believes that your life is controlled by mysterious forces that you can't understand, if you believe that you can't get a leg up, and, you know, ultimately you will come to blame the Jews. Like if you do enough internet sleuthing, that is where you will end up.
I can confirm that having 7 seasons of United Shades, that's where it all ends up. Yeah.
That is where it all ends up.
Black people
and
immigrants,
Yeah.
the women sometimes,
Right.
and it also the funnel gets down to like the LGBTQ plus community, the Jews.
It's always the Jews at the bottom of it all. That's a beautiful funnel you just drew with your hands. Yeah. And it's like if you don't understand certain things about anti-Semitism, a lot of the manifestations of it won't even be legible. Like a few months ago, Ye, the former Kanye West, like went on IG, went on Instagram, and just read this list of Jewish people who work in Hollywood, just one name after another. And it's like if you don't understand that by reading those names, the implication is that they are all working together in secret and terrible accord, it just won't make any sense. Like, the praxis has to be there for that even to be something that you're like, oh, yeah, right? Like, to use a counterexample, for 200 years, the upper ranks of the New York Police Department has been dominated by Irish folks, right? But nobody ever is like, yo, the Irish control the police, because people just don't think of the Irish that way, right? Like, you don't hear those conspiracies because the praxis dictates the specifics, not the other way around, if that makes sense.
Belief that you want to impose on it dictates what you see. That's what I ask you about, because I don't believe there's a mention of Kanye West in here or Kyrie Irving, but I would imagine, was that happening while you were writing this book?
No, I was actually done with the book by the time that stuff happened.
Oh, and then your publisher's like, can we release it tomorrow?
My publisher, yeah, by like publishing industry standards, this book came out very fast, which means like within a year of me selling it to them, not 2. And they were like, oh, it's so timely, we got to get it out quickly. And like, I didn't have the heart to tell them that, anti-Semitism would still be around in the winter,
We had the same thing happen with our anti-racist activity book. We got to get it out now while the racism, you'll be all right.
Strike while the iron is hot, yeah.
Fine.
Racism could be eradicated at any moment.
Racism is still a stock that is going up. It's still.
Yeah.
You can still buy it.
As high as it might be, you're still buying low on racism.
That's funny and sad.
What are the letters of the racism stock ticker, you think?
I guess,
I don't even want to,
Or is it RSM? I think it's RSM. Just to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, I remember we did an episode of United States of America. Like, I did the episode with the Klan that people know. And then there were forces at CNN, like, after a few seasons, why don't you go talk to the Klan again? And I was like, I'm not going to do that. And so
they're not going to say anything new.
No, I think I got it. But so what I did was like, I'll go talk to ex-white supremacists, people who've gotten out and are now activists, anti-racist activists. And we did the thing, and it's on the episode we did in Pittsburgh. My mom's in that episode. It's an episode about white supremacy, and my mom's in that episode. And I talked to these ex-white supremacists, and some of them were out more recently than others. Some had been out for like 20 years, and some guy was like out less than 5 years. So it's like was still on websites as a white supremacist, and he was out now. And they were still like, we're gonna see. And he said specifically, like, he's like, you know what the hardest thing to shake off after years and years of being a white supremacist? And I was like, what? He's like, it wasn't the black thing, it was the anti-Semitism. Like, that was the thing that had been so deeply embedded that he still felt like that it was still work to shake it off.
Yeah, I mean, it is truly ancient, and another thing that was striking to me as the news cycle was dominated by like the rantings of Ye and all these other people. And to be clear, like, the face of anti-Semitism in this country is not Kyrie Irving or Kanye West. The face of anti-Semitism in this country looks a lot more like Donald Trump or Richard Spencer. Right? I don't want to get distracted by these notions of like, the real problem is black anti-Semitism. No, it's not. It's very much not. But hearing these things, what I was struck by was just how ancient all of it was. Like, there were no new ideas. There haven't really been any significant new ideas in anti-Semitism in 1,000 years. It all is very kind of stale and recycled. And, we could kind of break down like where some of these stereotypes come from. They all come from somewhere. Like, Jews have historically, throughout almost our entire history, had fewer rights than the people among whom they lived, and have been pushed into certain professions, certain places that they were allowed to live. They paid higher taxes, or they couldn't ride horses, or they couldn't own land. So they become middlemen, they become liminal people, they become translators, literally and figuratively. Like, the Jews control Hollywood. Well, guess what? When Jewish Eastern European immigrants founded a bunch of the studios, they did so because there was no Hollywood, so nobody could keep them out of it. You know what I'm saying? It's really as simple as that. It was an industry that they could enter by inventing it. And for each and every sort of stereotype, there's usually some historical reason behind it. Like, how did we get here? It was through deprivation. It was through making something out of nothing. It was through hustling and figuring out how to survive.
So we are going to do Q&A, so get ready if you have some questions. We're going to go to you next if you're out there have questions. The last thing I would say about this book before we go to the Q&A is that you can see it. When you read it, it is very visual. Is this a TV show? Can I produce it? Can we get Ron Perlman to play the Golem? I got a lot of questions. Who's the Golem?
As a WGA member who, as of today, is no longer on strike.
Yes.
I would say absolutely. Let's go.
Do you see it? I would imagine.
It
feels cinematic.
Yeah.
It feels like
No, when I first conceived of it and I first wrote a 4-page outline on the day that I woke up and realized that thing about like funny skit meets ancestral memory, boom, now I have a book. I wrote a 4-page outline and I conceived of it first as a screenplay because I wanted it to be short and comic and punchy and tight. And I sent it to my agent and he said, "The Golem market is dead." So I was like, well, I guess it's a novel then. So yeah, I am actually quite excited about the screen potential of the Golem. And the Golem is also like a renewable resource, right? The Golem may get unmade in this book, but he can always be remade.
Golem Cinematic Universe.
Hey, there you go.
They love a cinematic universe. What actor would you envision? For some reason, Ron Perlman kept coming to me.
Ron Perlman's a great choice. Do you say that because you're thinking of Hellboy?
Probably.
Yeah.
But also, no, I'm actually thinking of the video that he released during the strike, where he basically, when like it was released, that the head of a studio said, "We're going to starve them we're going to starve the writers and actors out of their homes," and he put a video on Instagram with his face, like he's an older guy, so it's right up here on the screen, and he's like, "There's lots of ways to lose your home."
I love Ron Perlman, and I love his politics. Like, Ron Perlman is very progressive, so let's put that out there, Yeah, Ron Perlman. Holler at Kamau's people.
I want to ask you, do people have questions that they've written down they want to send up this way? I can keep riffing. Okay. What is I want to ask you about the craft. When you say there's a 4-page outline, are there specific software programs you're using? Are there things is there a way that you're doing it that, like, I know there's all these apps and programs. Is it just Microsoft Word?
I don't know anything about any of that. I use this program, called Microsoft Word, and I know how to open a new document. I can't make a spreadsheet. I don't even have a calendar.
It's not a process.
The process is sitting down in a chair and trying to go chapter by chapter and include as much pertinent information as possible, snippets of dialogue, where the thing begins, where it ends, what the point of it is. For me to start writing a book, I need to have a chapter by chapter outline of some sort that then I improvise on. It's by no means complete. It's liable to change as I fill it out and write it. But yeah, I want to know the beginning, the end, and pretty much every significant point in between so that I can then free myself up to improvise. Like in this book, some chapters were like very specific, and other chapters in my outline just said stuff like Golem history shit. And when I got there, I figured out, okay, this is a historical chapter. This is some Golem adventure somewhere in history. Okay, yeah, 5th century Babylon seems interesting. This is going to be the story of like the Golem and Lilith. Let's go. And then I'd research Lilith for 3 days, and then I'd like write the chapter.
Nice. Question. How have your personal Jewish beliefs evolved through the writing of this book?
For me, I mean, I grew up observant only in the sense that I noticed things. Like,
I'm an observant Jew. Observant is in italics.
Yeah. Like, my parents were very secular. I was not bar mitzvahed. I'm still a very elderly boy in the eyes of the Jewish world.
That tracks with what I know about you.
Yeah, I went to a Jewish Sunday school and got kicked out because I had this like super racist teacher who liked to talk about how he had moved out of Roxbury when the blacks moved in, and I was like, that doesn't sound right to me. I was this young hip hop kid. I was listening to Public Enemy and Boogie Down Productions, so I just fought him until they kicked me out of the school. I became like deeply interested in Judaism around the age of 25, 26 when I started writing a novel called The End of the Jews, which wasn't originally intended to be a book about Jews or Judaism. It was mostly a book about my generation and my grandparents' generation. And my grandfather was still alive, so a lot of my research just involved spending a great deal of time with him. And the more I talked to him, the more I realized that his life was constrained and defined by his Judaism, although he was incredibly secular. It was still a profound fact of his life. And I think that made me start thinking of it in a different way. And I've sort of been on a journey ever since where my interest and my study and my research and the ways that I think about Judaism continues to evolve. It used to be that I tried to look at Judaism mostly through like a social justice lens. Like, what are the traditions that I come from that I can apply to the way I see the world? How can I use that as an infrastructure, as a backbone to do the work I want to do out here? And now at this point, I'm just sort of like, I'm just kind of interested in sucking up as much knowledge as I can. Like, reading the Talmud every day is a pretty good indication of that. I have 3 kids, 2 of them very young, 2 of them with a Jewish woman, Jamie. Hi, Jamie. This is Jamie. She's wonderful. The fact that there are 2 Jewish people in the home now changes things, and the level of ritual and of Jewish practice that we impart to these kids, and also to my oldest daughter, Viv. Shout out to Viv, 15-year-old Viv, sitting here in the front row. I think it really has, it's been assimilated into my life in bigger and bigger ways the older I get, and the more I just sort of like engage with these traditions. I don't know. I guess that's my answer. It's a work in progress, I think.
But it is a work, though. It was a work in progress. Someone wants to know: have you read *The Deep* by Rivers Solomon?
No.
That's the wrong answer. No, I don't know. I don't.
Read *The Deep* by Rivers Solomon?
No. I mean, I'm not saying no. I just mean no. I have not. Okay. But it was. I think anyway.
Should I? Cool. Done.
Who are your influences, and who are you reading? These are the questions that people love to ask the creatives.
Yeah. I think one of the things for me that's wonderful about writing novels or just writing in general is.
Did you say one of the things that's wonderful about me? Is that what you just said?
No, I said about writing novels and stuff.
Okay, all right. That's what I thought. Jamie, did you hear that too? Okay, all right.
Let me tell you a few wonderful things about me. No, one of the wonderful things about writing novels is that you kind of get to have a discrete set of influences for each project. You sort of reinvent who you want to be in conversation and dialogue with. I think for this book, it's Roberto Bolaño, particularly because he just breaks every rule. Like, the idea of including a bunch of summaries of other novels in your novel is like a very Bolaño idea. He's got an entire book where it's just that. It's just a compendium of summaries of books that he is not going to get around to writing. I'm always influenced by contemporary satirists who I think are very agile and political and nimble and unafraid. So people like Paul Beatty and Percival Everett. With this book, I wrote 2 humor books before this, 2 Jewish humor books with Dave Barry and Alan Zweibel. And funnily enough, a lot of the research from this book began in doing the research necessary to write a bunch of dumb jokes in those books. But those guys are both comedic geniuses. And a lot of my thinking about humor and the structure of humor and the deployment of humor, I think, is indebted to them. So I'd count them on my list as well.
Do you ever experience self-doubt with your wild creative ideas?
Yes.
Next
But,
question.
you know,
sorry.
I mean, I've had a weird career. And
Yes.
and, you know, if I have learned anything in this weird career, and there's a good chance I haven't, it's kind of to trust my wild ideas, like kind of trust my craziest ideas. If I'm writing a book and I'm having fun, and even more so if I'm writing a book and every night I'm saying to Jamie, like, no one's gonna publish this. Or like, I sell the book and then I turn around and say to her or my friends or whoever, like, I can't believe they're letting me publish this. Like, that usually means I'm like on the right track. I've come to trust like the wild ideas almost more than the more tamped down, saner ideas.
So can we talk about the album that accompanies the book? There's a hip hop album that is the Golem of Brooklyn. You talk about why that happened, why that's necessary, and then answer the question: best hip hop group and why.
Okay. So yeah, there's an album called the Golem of Brooklyn Original Soundtrack. It's 12 original songs by the Chicago MC Def C, Defcee. Entirely produced by a guy named Messiah Music. And I think it's brilliant. It brought me to tears many times as I would listen to the tracks that Def C would send me, because he had engaged so deeply with the book and ruminated so profoundly on it and created art that was inspired by it but wasn't derivative of it, that expanded on the themes, sometimes hewed very close to the book. Like, he's rapping from the perspective of the golem in the book. He's rapping from the perspective of Adolfo, the bodega cat, who narrates one chapter of the book. But he also makes it very much his own, and he grapples with these ideas and these themes. The way it happened is that on a whim one day, I sort of always look for collaborations of certain sorts, particularly musically, when I put out a novel. The novel I published before this had an accompanying mixtape by J. Period with original music by Black Thought and Common and people like that. On a whim, I sent Def C a DM, and I said, hey man, I got this book coming out in the fall, and I wonder if you'd consider reading it and thinking about whether you might in some way be inspired to make some kind of music that's in conversation with it. And he was like, yeah, send it. Def C is a guy that I've known since he was in high school. He came up in the Chicago art scene under the auspices of an organization called Young Chicago Authors. I used to visit and be a guest teacher a lot at that program. It was started by friends of mine. A lot of incredible talent has come up through that program. Def C, No Name, Vince Staples, Chance the Rapper. All these kids came up through that program. And then Def C went on to the First Wave program at Madison, which was a scholarship program, the only one in the country for like spoken word and hip hop artists. I followed him there. I've stayed in touch with him, and I've watched him blossom into a really, really dope lyricist. So I sent him the book, and less than 24 hours later, he called me and was like, oh my God, like this book I connect so deeply to this book. I want to do a whole album. And I was like, let's go. So he and I just had a constant dialogue, mostly over text messages, occasionally on the phone, where we would just tease out ideas, discuss directions this could take. He would sometimes send me screenshots of lyrics he'd written, and we just kind of figured it out. And I'm really, really proud of the work. I'm flattered that it exists. I'm flattered that the book could inspire something like that. The album comes out on Friday. It'll be on all the streaming platforms, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's kind of I'm just so happy that it exists. Oh,
That's why I gave you time to stall.
greatest hip hop group of all time. Well,
And why?
all right. I think I'm gonna say De La Soul. De La Soul has 4 consecutive, unquestionably classic albums. There are a number of other groups that do as well. Gang Starr does, Outkast does, but for my money, and in terms of the level of innovation that each of those albums represented, I bought them all as they came out. I'm old enough that I go back that far. So like I experienced them in real time and experienced the impact they all had on the culture at the time. Yeah, I think nobody really touches or matches De La. And it's ironic because, you know, they fought this 30-year war against their record label, and none of those albums has been on streaming until like a couple of months ago. So, you know, like my daughter's generation, like kids at her high school, she goes to Oakland School for the Arts, by the way, make some noise for Oakland School of the Arts. You know, like they all know A Tribe Called Quest. They all know Gangstar and Hieroglyphics and MF Doom. Like she'll get in my car and play MF Doom, and I'm like, I'm buying you a pony. But like, because De La wasn't on these platforms, only now can they be exposed to it. And it's gonna be fascinating to see how a generation that doesn't know their influence or their importance is finally gonna be exposed to it. And it's bittersweet because Dave, one of the members of the group, died exactly at that time. So go listen to some De La.
Somebody wants to know, the same person wants to know who in the movie, who do I play in the movie?
Who do you play in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, there's seems weird.
I mean, you read the book. Who do you want to play?
I mean, it feels like I think they'll. I already gave the good role away to Ron Perlman, so also that feels like it should probably be a Jewish person. Probably the Bodega Cat. I think that's about the best.
Ooh, yeah, I like that. Kamau as a Dofo the Bodega Cat.
Yeah,
love it.
Okay.
Also, in the spirit of casting the movie, I want to shout out a character / person who's very important to the book, which is Len's best friend, who figures heavily in the book as Len's drug dealer and the guy who accidentally gives the Golem 50,000 doses of LSD. His name is Waleed. And I have a very good friend here in the Bay named Waleed, who I think is in the building, so I want to shout out Waleed. Yeah, there we go.
Did you choose to release the book today, the day after Yom Kippur, intentionally?
So, much like the publisher's contention that they got to rush it out before anti-Semitism disappears, there's also the conversation with the publisher where they're like, we're going to put the book out during the Jewish high holidays. And I'm like, that's not really a big book buying time for the Jewish world. Like it's not like Christmas. It's like the opposite of Christmas. So no, it was not intentional, but you know, at least they didn't release it on although it's funny because I published an op-ed in the Washington Post today about golems, and thank you. And I woke up in a cold sweat like 4 days ago because I realized that they had scheduled it to run yesterday. And at like 3 a.m., I wrote my editor this frantic email like, this is the worst day of the entire year to publish this op-ed. We can't publish it. It's Yom Kippur. And, you know, luckily there's some Jews at the Washington Post, and they were like, oh, yeah, we'll move it. But I was like, oh, my God. Like, the squandered possibilities of that were like too much for me to comprehend.
There's a question about, were you thinking about AI when writing this book? If not, do you think, or is AI a concern to you?
It's funny because another frequent and recent application of like the idea of the golem is to AI. Like the golem is often invoked as a kind of primordial version of an AI, right? It's a thing that is brought to life that doesn't have its own intelligence, but that, you know, maybe can learn. Yeah, it's yeah, like if you open like Wired magazine, you're gonna see a reference to the golem. I wasn't thinking about that version or that set of implications of the golem when I read the book, but am I worried about AI? Hell yeah, I'm worried about AI. Like, one of the things the WGA just fought this battle against was the studio's attempt to quietly replace us all with AI. I think, I don't know, by a show of hands, who in this room is not worried about AI? Okay, cool. Yeah, we're on the same page here. Yeah, I think AI is terrifying. The idea of it proceeding in this kind of unregulated fashion, dictated by the free market, should strike fear into the hearts of everybody who's ever seen the Terminator movies.
Last question. Do you have thoughts for creating comic book characters? Let's see. Do you have thoughts about Jews creating comic book superheroes and how that maps onto the historic golem as the powerful hero rescuing the damsel in distress, that's the Jewish people. Like,
Well,
and I would say, sort of on top of that, is like most of the most popular superheroes were created by Jewish people.
yeah, that's facts.
Yeah.
Right, whether it's Superman, who some have suggested is Golem-like, at least has an alien origin. That one I don't see quite as clearly, but like Ben Grimm, The Thing,
Yeah.
canonically Jewish. The Incredible Hulk has very Golem-like qualities. Kitty Pryde is Jewish or is a golem? Okay, are we just listing Jewish superheroes now, Viv?
Yes, that's what we're doing. That's your daughter. That's what we're
Viv
doing.
would like you all to know that Kitty Pryde from X-Men is also canonically Jewish.
Moon Knight, canonically Jewish.
Canonically
And
Jewish.
some Jewish people were upset that in the TV show that Moon Knight wasn't Jewish enough.
Oh, right, because Oscar Isaac is like not Jewish enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. They should have got my man B.J. Novak. He's the Jewish Oscar Isaac.
I don't know if I'm afraid of him beating me up though. I don't know.
Yeah, but are you afraid Oscar Isaac is gonna beat you up?
So his intense stare is frightening.
I'm afraid he's gonna like smolder at me.
That's
maybe.
what I mean.
Yeah.
There's a smolder.
No, I mean, I think the Jewish, and specifically the Jewish American imagination that gave birth to the comic bonanza, the golden age of comics, the silver age of comics, yeah, certainly those guys were drawing on the disparate mythologies of the world, whether it's Norse, Egyptian, Greek, and certainly Jewish. And I think in a post-war America, certainly the thinking around protection and survival and the superheroic intervention that could have changed the course of history was particularly potent and important. So, yeah, I mean, those guys played an outsized role in the development of that industry, which at the time was like this niche thing for kids and is now sort of global monoculture. So, you know, it's obviously part of a wide secret Jewish conspiracy, I would say.
You can't end the whole night there. Give these people some wise words to leave with, since you ended on secret Jewish conspiracy theory.
That's just wise words.
Well, for me, okay, I'll say, for me, there's a part of this book that is a sort of a great sort of like either reminder or education on like, you know, those of us who are not Jews don't spend that much time with this history. And coming out of it, I felt like the want to share, you know what I mean? The want to go, did you know? You know, and I think there's a lot of like great stories about Jewish people, and some of them from history, some of them fake. Google the ones to make sure you know which ones are which. But that is like a sort of a reclaiming, recentering of what it is to be Jewish in modern times, and specifically when you map it up against like a Charlottesville type incident.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as Jewish folks, we need to do a lot of soul searching and do a lot of reframing and rethinking about what the essential moral values that we want to carry forward are. And I think that some of the keys to those things will be found in our stories. I mean, storytelling is what we do as human beings, and it is particularly what we do and what we have done as Jewish people. There's a reason that we're the people of the book. There's a profound rigor and sense of importance that we have always placed upon truly and deeply parsing every law, every custom, every practice. There's a necessity to get it right that is holy in its own sense. And we have always prized and privileged dialogue, argumentation, disagreement, synthesis. And when I look at the landscape and the tightening constraints over what you are supposed to be allowed to do and say and think as a Jewish person, particularly around these global issues, these geopolitical issues, the state of Israel, there is a narrowing of the aperture that is scary to me, that is, in my mind, profoundly anti-Jewish, goes against the values that I hold most deeply to be Jewish. You know, Jews in this country have journeyed from very clearly and specifically not white to largely being seen as white, although never by white supremacists. And, you know, we need to decide what side of empire we want to be on and who we want our allies and our bedfellows to be. And from where I sit, anytime the knives come out, anytime Nazis are marching in the streets, anytime the rights of any marginalized group are loudly and vociferously threatened in this country, whether it's gay and trans folks, immigrants, women, that's a harbinger of bad things for the Jews. These things are all deeply connected, and I think that ought to tell us who our allies are and who we need to be getting the backs of, both for our own self-interest and because it is morally imperative that we do so, and it's the beginning of, I think, rethinking and rededicating ourselves to this idea of tikkun olam, repairing the world.
Adam Mansbach, everybody.
Thank you.
The books are out front. Buy several. He will sign them. Are you signing them books?
Signing them.
He's signing books. We'll see you out there. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.